Welcome everybody at Digital Revolution, second edition, day 3. We have today, so we are here with 25 participants from all over the world, and we have also a global panel again that will address the topic of new technologies and the relation with festivals from a cross-sector perspective. So we have speakers from the academic field, but also from social movements, looking into digital safety, audience interaction, etc. and the like. So I'm happy to announce Christine van Winkle, who works in Canada at Manitoba University. There's Brett Pyper from the Wits University, South Africa. We have Manon Muti, who is an independent digital security expert. And there is Hooman Nassimi, who we've been seeing in different panels, who will look now at how to include newcomers in the digital sphere. So the floor is all to Mike van Graan, who will facilitate this session. So please go, Mike.
Thanks very much, Inge. And yeah, thank you for the introductions of the speakers as well. In our preparatory chat, we agreed that we'll start with Christine. She is very graciously with us at 5:30, I think, in the morning in her time, or she is speaking to us from Canada. And then she'll be followed by Hooman, and Brett will be speaking on a similar kind of theme. And finally, we'll have Manon, who's based in the Netherlands, together with Hooman as well. And then we'll invite people to ask whatever questions they would like of each of the speakers in the group chat, and speakers will respond there, but I might also integrate your questions into the facilitated conversation that we have. So each of the speakers are going to be speaking about quite big subjects, and unfortunately they each have quite limited time. So don't fret, because they will be pursuing these themes in a little bit more depth in the roundtables that they're part of a little bit later. And then those of you who would like to have one-on-ones with them in the mentor meetings from 4 o'clock this afternoon CET time, obviously you can sign up for those too. So without any further ado, as they say, we'll hand over to Christine to begin this particular panel. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, it's really early here, and so I've decided I'm going to share my screen with you to keep me on track, since my head might be a little bit foggy at 5 o'clock in the morning. So just bear with me while I select my screen, and I'll just confirm that everybody can see a PowerPoint screen in front of them. Excellent, fantastic. So as Mike mentioned, I'm here from Canada. I'm a professor at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada, where I teach tourism and event management. But I come at this from a festival's perspective because I spent the first part of my career as a festival administrator. I was the coordinator for the Winnipeg Fringe Theatre Festival in Winnipeg, Canada, and then moved on to serving as the vice president of the Winnipeg International Comedy Festival, which is a televised festival here across the country, and actually is now also televised in the US. So when I transitioned to being an academic, a big motivator for me was to find ways to better understand how we function as festival organizations and how we connect with audiences. And so all of the research I do is theory driven, but it's intended to apply to practice. And so for today's chat, what I wanted to do is just review a few broad theories that I spend a lot of time working with and researching, and talk a bit about how they apply to the topic we're talking about here. My research program started by looking at visitor experiences in a range of settings, but in festivals in particular, and then moved into digital technology and how we engage visitors through technology. And now focuses more on crisis communication and emergency management, which is a change I made about 2 years before the pandemic, but the timing couldn't have been more appropriate. So I'll share a little bit from across those areas. So I'm just having one hiccup with my slides. There we go. I'll give you a minute to read this. We started a study early on in the pandemic to look at how festivals were coping, and I feel like this quote resonates well with the kinds of things we were hearing from festival coordinators from across the country. People felt an urgent need to react, to reduce the uncertainty, and to make decisions about how to go forward. But after a year of this, I think we're all in a situation where we're needing to take a step back and take a moment to think about how we're engaging, how we want to communicate with our audiences, and the ways that we want to move forward at a more manageable pace. As I mentioned, one of the first areas I started exploring as an academic was visitor experiences. And we did a large study across Canada looking at different festivals to understand what are the essential elements of a visitor experience. And in doing this, we created this model that is actually based on models from management and marketing. And it's based on something called the service dominant logic. But ultimately, it's quite straightforward, and it probably resonates with anyone who's ever worked with and engaged with a festival. And that is that festival experiences aren't just produced, and they aren't just experienced. They are co-created by a range of actors working together to create something meaningful and unique. And this became really clear during the pandemic. I remember talking early on with the comedy festival here about how a comedy festival with no audience definitely loses an important piece of what makes it meaningful to both to the performer as well as to the people watching the comedy. So as the comedy festival considered going online during this time, it felt like too much would be lost, and they made a choice to hold back until they could be an in-person event. But here you see that the festival attendees, influential others like volunteers, artists, vendors, and then the unique context, the city, the community, and so on that your festival takes place in contributes to this experience. So before we ever even begin to look at offering new digital experiences, whether it's going online because of the pandemic or exploring things like virtual reality, I think it's really important to look at what is the essential element of your unique festival experience. While every festival has a social, personal, arts or cultural and physical experience, how those are created within the unique context of your festival really is what makes your festival special. And I think particularly during a time when we see more and more events going to the digital space, it's more important than ever to differentiate ourselves. And I think if we have a really clear understanding of who our audience is, what their experience is, then we can identify elements of that experience that make sense to move into a digital space, whether it's new VR programming or going online during the pandemic. These are other aspects of experience that we explore through research with our community festivals here that I also think are really meaningful when you look at moving into a digital space. So sense of community, co-creation, and sense of place. I was reading about Tomorrowland and how they created an island, a virtual island, mythical island, a new place, a new space for people to experience. And it was an interesting way to create a new sense of space. But for a lot of community festivals, what they actually want to do is bring their space into people's lives through digital, because the space itself where the festival is typically held has so much meaning for people. And so some festivals I've talked to, folk festivals in particular, have done some things where they've had candles produced with a unique scent that people can purchase. So it's sold as merchandise, but then if they attend the virtual event, the idea is you would burn this candle and have the smell of the festival environment. Hopefully it smells like campfire and not sweat and other festival smells. So this is another model that we use to understand visitor experience, and this one's specific to the digital space. So this is something called the typology of human capability. And what it does is it looks at when people enter a digital space, what are the kinds of experiences that are even possible? Because we all know, especially after this year, that it isn't the same as live spaces. So when we look at digital spaces, what we find are there are 4 main types of experiences that people can have. And these are based on whether they're engaging individually or as a group, and whether or not they're connecting or they're doing something. And so the 4 types of experiences that we find people can have in the digital space are linking experiences, organizing experiences, sensing experiences, and performing experiences. And you can see here, I'll give you just a moment to look at what each of these is about. So I'll talk briefly about what these look like in our current context and some examples that I've seen in the last number of months. So this research we did on this model, we did well before the pandemic, but we are actually collecting data now to look at if this still holds true, given the number of events that have gone online. So linking experiences are those experiences where we want to connect with others. And so there's been lots of attempts at this, creating social opportunities to help maintain relationships. Often this is done through things like social media, but I think there may be some really creative ways we can create meaningful linking experiences. One example I heard someone throw about was, if you know that your festival is a place where young people like to meet friends or like to potentially find a partner, partnering your online event with a dating app could be a really unique way to create a new linking experience. But there's all sorts of things like this, helping people to connect with their own communities. So I've seen a lot of porch parades here in North America where people decorate their porches and the festival puts a map of the porch for things like pride parades and so on, and you get to find out who in your community is doing what. But you can also offer organizing experiences. So things like fine arts festivals that have collaborative art projects online, or sensing experiences. The most common example of these are the kind of VR experiences that people tend to produce, but we can have other sensory experiences, like the example I gave of the candle, or like a lot of festivals here have been partnering with breweries or distilleries to create custom drinks to have people engage with at home when they attend the virtual festival. And then you can have performing experiences. So performing experiences are those that contribute to creating a virtual world. And I haven't seen an example of this, and maybe some of you have, but this is where you could do things like have people help to create the virtual space by contributing their own ideas, images, and so on, so that people are really part of that co-creation experience. Sorry, I'm stuck in the chat here. There we go. So the last model I wanted to very quickly share with you in the short amount of time that I'm going to talk today is something called the Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology. So what we heard from a lot of festivals here was that, okay, so we invest all this time and energy to go online. Is anyone going to come? Especially when we're competing with how many other events. And this is a theory that's intended to help address that question. It comes out of management and marketing, and we've adapted it again for the festival setting and done a fair bit of research on this over the course of 5 years. And all of these factors play into whether or not people will engage in a new technology. So whether it's you're moving your live event online, or you've decided to try something like an enhanced reality app at your festival site, taking a look at all these factors would help you to understand whether or not people are likely to adopt a technology. So what we find in the festival setting is that the 4 I've highlighted here, these are the ones that are most commonly influencing people's choice to use technology in festival settings, and that I think are going to have the most impact on whether or not people will join you in an online environment. So this idea that effort expectancy, does it take a lot of effort to engage in this new technology? People are lazy. People are shy of new technology. People want something that's simple and easy to use. And so I think that's a really important question. hedonic motivation. Is it fun? Is it entertaining? Is it exciting? And I think that this hedonic motivation piece can actually override the effort piece. So if your new technology is really fun and exciting, then yeah, you can ask people to put in a bit of effort. But if it isn't, I think you need to be really cautious about how much effort, like downloading apps and so on, you're going to ask people to do in order to participate. So another piece is social influence. So people tend to use technology that their friends are using. And so I think when we move to a virtual world or we're trying out a new technology, really great to get key influential people at your event engaged. So this could be volunteers that everybody recognizes their face, performers that have come back year after year, or just attendees that are very loyal attendees. If you get them in the online space, you're more likely to get others to join. And then perceived value. And I think this is something we all struggle with right now, where there's so much online content that how do we add value? And I think a lot of events have played with hybrid events that have some piece that happens in the real world to try and add value. But this is definitely something that influences whether or not people were willing to go online. Now, I suspect my time is very close to up, if not already up. So I'm just going to put this up there in the hopes that we can chat about it if people are interested later. But this is the research we're currently doing here in North America. And we actually have a Canada, United States, Mexico study going on where we're looking at how festival business models are evolving during the pandemic and how festivals are coping with uncertainty. And the festival business model piece is particularly interesting because what we have found is the business model is shifting and different festivals are having really impactful experiences right now. Many of them for the good. So organizational sustainability is one piece here that we have seen all organizations struggle with. So organizations that were in really good shape before the pandemic were able to use this as a launch pad to try and explore new opportunities. But those that were struggling financially or with governance issues, they're struggling even further. However, many of them have seen this as an opportunity to take a pause and get their house in order. And again, just to be respectful of the other people who are here to speak today, I'm going to wrap up there, but I'll leave you with this quote. I think moving into a digital space, whether it's real world and engaging with digital at your festival site or moving your festival to an online environment is nerve-wracking and it may not always work, but I do think it's worth a try and we can engage new audiences and find new ways to engage existing audiences by giving some of these things a try. Thanks, everyone.
Great, Christine. That's an amazing way to have started today. Thank you. Talking about business models for digital festivals and for hybrid festivals, that's kind of been one of the themes over the last number of months. So we look forward to your study and what comes out of it, and its capacity also to be applied to different contexts, because obviously, as you say, you're basically doing this research within the Americas at the moment, or within North America. But what you've begun to do with regard to festivals and the experience of audiences, again, that's such an under-researched area. So really looking forward to your participating a whole lot more with us in the Atelier space over the next few months and years, because I think that what you're doing is amazing. So thank you for that. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome back into our space a good Hooman, as we call it, Hooman Nassimi. Always good to have you with us, Hooman. So we look forward to your chatting to us about integrating the new populations, as it were, within our respective countries into our countries and societies using digital platforms. So look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Inge, and the whole Festival Academy for having me again. I hope you're not sick of me yet. I'll keep coming back for as long as you will have me, because social inclusion is indeed a topic that is closest to my heart. I started a new Faces project, which supports and coaches cultural organizations, especially in the Netherlands, on how to work with newcomers and include them as personnel and as audience. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how a festival for exciting and new music in The Hague, which usually takes place in person, physically, but they're going to have their first online edition next week. and again, a physical edition in September. And we've created a plan on how to do this and how to work with newcomers even starting now. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how we did that, what challenges we've encountered, and how we solved problems to give you an idea on how to work on social inclusion in your respective organization. So first of all, there's the urgency. Why do we need to work with newcomers? Social isolation is just massive when it comes to newcomers. So for refugees and asylum seekers and people who are new in this country, having no professional or social network is just what makes it so hard to find your own way, create your own path, and create independence for yourself. In the Netherlands, there was a study before Corona where 40% of all Syrians in the Netherlands felt despondent or depressed. 40%, that's a massive number. And that has only increased with Corona. The recorded amount of suicides that has been taking place has risen through the newcomer population during Corona times. And thus, I feel it's really duty for us as cultural organizations to work with newcomers because we can offer connections. We have so many different ideas and so many different possibilities inside of our organizations to work with newcomers, and it's easy for us to do. That's what I feel. And just because it is easy, it doesn't mean that the impact isn't big. The impact is massive, and it starts just with one encounter. That's the kind of urgency. But the reason why we need to work with newcomers, I feel, especially in the cultural sector, is because it's a very competitive industry. No, you have to stay relevant year by year. You have to tap into new audiences, and the role of social inclusion and responsibility just gets bigger. You can't kind of avoid it. And that's really nice to see that also I see a lot of awareness in the cultural sector to work with newcomers and to be aware of social issues. But newcomers will help us to think differently because they come from different backgrounds. And because of those different backgrounds, they do look at our program, they look at the things that are happening at the festival, at the decor, at the music, at the food from a completely different perspective. And that will help us to innovate where we are standing right now. Diversity leads to innovation. I mean, if that hasn't been said a million times before, it is now more true than ever. And with newcomers, especially, that will help us to unlock new audiences and very loyal audiences at that. And when you tap into those audiences, there's also a spillover effect. Think about the audiences that you've been trying to tap into for maybe a while now, or you've been trying to think about how to get access to them, how to involve them with your festival, necessarily maybe not from a commercial motivation, but just simply because you want to be a society, a festival or a cultural organization that is for everybody. Access to culture is for all of us, and we know how inspiring it is for all of us. So with that spillover effect, we can reach different kinds of audiences, maybe immigrants, second, first generation that are new. So that's something that we really need to look into. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted because there was something happening in the chat. Okay. So that's the kind of reason why we need to work with newcomers. And that's exactly the kind of motivation that Rewire Festival had when they decided to work with newcomers. What we did then is we looked at how we can include newcomers inside of our organization. And I said before, as personnel and as audience, because newcomers is that kind of word that is tough to use because it describes so many different people. I've worked with newcomers who were 18 up to, I think, 68, 72, who were male, female, transgender, non-binary. We had different beliefs, different educational levels, different backgrounds. So, you know, as far as you can go, we had artists, we had professionally trained ice skaters. No, we had literally everybody. It's as diverse as our own society in that sense. And that's why we need to not restrict ourselves beforehand when we think about what we want to do with newcomers. It's always good to start with a clear goal. So let's say you have volunteers and you want to include maybe 100 newcomers as volunteers inside of your own organization. But then it's extremely important to set down a moment where you get to know newcomers and do a speed date, for instance, with your own organization. Because through that encounter, through that spark of inspiration, you get to create completely new ideas and develop new thoughts on what you can do with each other. So very clear, we had a dozen of sign-ups last week for the speed that we had organized on Monday, and we had no idea who is behind those names, right? And this is something that I've done now for 4 years with, I think, 30 or more cultural organizations, but it's still every time exciting when we have new people come in and you don't know where they're coming from, what their motivation is, what their energy is going to be like. And through that speed date, we got to meet very interesting individuals who had all their own aspirations, their own ideas, their musical tastes. As I said, this is a festival that is kind of adventurous in its music. So that's where it gets really interesting, because you have maybe somebody who is really into jazz, but somebody else who's just into pop music. Not to say anything bad about pop music. And through that, we can get different kinds of insights. But we also get to know that these people are maybe resilient, or they have a background in a specific area. And then we can say, okay, well, it's great that you can participate in any case, but maybe you could also fit a future function at our organization that we're thinking about, or you could become a leader for the volunteers or coordinator or whatever, because you have different kinds of experiences that we are actually looking for, maybe implicitly inside of our own organizations. And that's where it gets really interesting. So the encounter is super important. So even now, when you are thinking, hey, I don't have really something to offer for newcomers, I don't want to waste their time, or like build expectations but not be able to fill them in, don't worry about that. Just through the connection that you make, that's already a lot. Just being part of that network is amazing for newcomers. And that's every time the feedback that I get, that from newcomers, they really just want to go out, they just want to get to know people. And it doesn't mean that you need to play a specific role in their lives, but just that human connection is very inspiring. And that's for both parties, right? Let's talk about how we can then find these newcomers and get in touch with them. Wherever you are in the world, if you know that there are newcomers area, or there's been a recent migration happening, you can just type into Google, and I hate this word, I'm sorry for using it, refugee, plus the name of your city, plus language school or integration school. Naturally, all newcomers need to learn the language where they are now. So I'm here in The Hague in the Netherlands. I would just type in refugee, The Hague, integration school, or language school in Dutch. And then we would find a list of schools that we can then get in touch with and have them drop by these schools, make an appointment to go there on your own or with a couple of people in your team, say, hi, I'm from Rewire Festival. I would really love to work with all of you and invite you to experience our festival and maybe work with us as volunteers. But first, we want to get to know you. So I'm just here to invite you, to get you to sign up. So beforehand, you make a Google form, for instance, where you just put these basic questions down, name, address, all of these things, and get people to sign up at that spot. That's really crucial. If you just leave it with the teacher, or, hey, you can sign up an hour later, no problem. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You'll get nothing out of it. You need to tell people, hey, this is the link, maybe create a short link, get people to open it. Everybody has a mobile phone these days. Everybody has internet on their phones, assumingly, and get people to sign up. And then you have, and that's the thing that a lot of organizations, where I see these social inclusion projects kind of fail, especially with newcomers, is the recruitment. Because there's some third party, there's some kind of gatekeeper, they all have their own motivations and agendas, and they make it difficult. You now have a list of contacts, right? So you don't need anybody else to get in touch with the group that you want to work with. And that makes it so much easier. And especially now in Corona times, you might say, well, it's kind of hard to drop by. What we had the coordinator for social inclusion at Rewire do is create a short video, 60 seconds in easy Dutch, just invite newcomers to meet them for an online speed date. And we pasted the same text, the script, into the email with a sign-up link. That's it. So keeping it very simple, communicating a clear message, and having people then direct towards a concrete action is something that works extremely well. Something that did surprise me, though, especially in this online context, because we had worked with newcomers also during Amsterdam Dance Event in 2020 during the digital edition, was that we had, for instance, a dozen of signups, but 80 to 90% of them didn't participate at the festival. And that's because, and that's something that Christine said, which I believe is absolutely true, is people are shy of new technology. If you create a new platform that is hard to access. That is hard to understand. It takes an investment and it takes courage to kind of sit down and get to look it up. So what we are doing now with Rewire is that we're going to give a very concrete assignment to newcomers, where we create a framework for them to experience the festival. So we say, hey, we would like you to give us input on, for instance, program X at this time. And then we're going to have a check-in moment during the day and during the second day of the festival, just to create that feeling of being together, being as a group, and understanding what people are going through and being able to play into their challenges and work through their barriers. But it's also amazing to create moments beforehand. So we just had that speed date on Monday. Monday, they created a really great first connection. Everybody went out of the meeting extremely happy with ideas in their minds. And now on coming Monday, we're going to have another short meeting where we're going to work with the newcomers through how to find the program and how to kind of find your way through that program. I think even as regular visitors for festivals, I mean, there's so many choices. And it's hard to find and create your own route based on your own interests. So with Rewire, we are going to just explain to them how to use the website, where you can look up artists, and how to create your own route, because obviously we want to make use of their different backgrounds to look at the program. So for us to create a program for them doesn't make sense, even though it has a good intention, right? That's something that we usually have. We want to really take care of the people that we invite, but we also want to understand, and we need to know that these are very, 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 very resilient people. Newcomers have gone through an insane journey to be where they are. So they're going to be fine. That's something you don't need to worry about. And the people that are going to sign up are only the people that are going to be motivated. That's something that I've encountered in 99% of the time. Having worked with, I think, more than 1,000 newcomers only in 2019, we had people that were really motivated to come, even though they didn't really understand what the festival was about or what this adventure is going to entail. They were ready and they wanted to get out there because they wanted to meet new people. The need for social connection.
Hooman.
Yeah.
Sorry. You
Oh,
were watching
yes.
the chat.
Oh,
The chat
no.
brilliantly earlier, but not now. So
Oh, no.
Maybe another minute or so to tie up.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'll round it up. Oh,
No
I closed the chat because I was getting confused with messages. I'm so sorry. Okay. Yes. So skip all of that. Yes. Be authentic when you meet newcomers, and especially when you work with newcomers, they will be your ambassadors. So now the people that we're going to have next Monday, they're going to be our ambassadors for newcomers for the festival in September. They're going to be extremely loyal, and they will help you to unlock new audiences and create programming for you to be more competitive and bring a unique flair to your organization, because there are little other culture organizations in your field that work with newcomers. So you have that competitive edge as well. So sorry, Mike. That's it.
No. I mean, I think we should be the ones apologizing. You folk have so much to offer. So yes, thank you for your presentation again. And there's been so much mentioning of speed dating and apps, and those kind of, Christine mentioned it, you've mentioned it. Maybe, Inga, we need to look at the ateliers signing up with the speed dating kind of exercise as well. But maybe let's hear from Brett Pyper in Johannesburg, how they engage with social media in terms of integrating new audiences. Thanks, Brett.
So thanks, Mike, and really lovely to be speaking with you all. Like Christine, I've transitioned in recent years from directing a national festival into an academic space. And I'm interested in actually what those two kind of spaces of cultural production can mean for each other. But like Hooman, I'm also really passionate around this question about what social inclusion means in a festival context. And what I'd like to share with you from the perspective of a South Africa that still wrestles with difficult racialized histories, with enormous socioeconomic disparities and so on, is what it means for us to be taking a conversation about digital access to festival work in a context like Johannesburg. So I'm going to speak a little bit about not only having a really important agenda about including people in festivals that already exist, but how, if we take this question seriously, we might also be able to expand our understandings and repertoires of what festivals are. And I learned this in a really interesting way when I directed the Klein Karoo National Arts Festival in South Africa, which happens on one of the most difficult socio-political fault lines one could imagine. It's an Afrikaans language festival, in other words, the language of apartheid. But within the local community where the festival happens, the majority are mother tongue speakers of this very language who are marginalized from it when Afrikaans was positioned as a language of whiteness. And in the course of reaching out to developing programming and partnerships that were locally grounded, a First Nations identifying cultural organizer came to me and said, you know, we had festivals too, before any colonists came. And that's why we come to the festival. And we bring our ways of being festive to your festival. And that led me to understand that, in fact, there are ways of being together socially that people bring with them to a festival, no matter how you design it. But what would it be like if you actually designed it from that place and you centered that perspective? So fast forward to my coming back to Johannesburg, where I grew up, and working with a really special community of practice that I've been honored to know for many years now and wrote a doctoral study about. And this is a community of jazz appreciators who fall among, again, the demographic groups that under apartheid would have been the most marginalized. It's a group of now mostly elderly jazz appreciators who gather on weekends to listen to their jazz recordings, who dress up, and who have developed an intensely social, locally grounded culture of listening that has a really beautiful tradition of solo improvised dance associated with it, and is largely invisible to the mainstream jazz audiences who go to the clubs and the festivals in the city center. And so myself and my students have been working with this group, particularly under the conditions of the lockdown, because we felt an obligation to work with them, firstly, to make sure that they are safe, and recognizing that the lockdown has done something that not even the apartheid system was able to do, which was, for a time, to cease their practice. And during the course of the first months of the lockdown last year, we had already been working together towards inventing a festival format that would be more socially resonant and inclusive and grounded in their socio-political reality and geographies and so on. We started having to have the discussion with them of what it would mean to be able to maintain their practice under current conditions. And the challenge we're taking on, which I'd written about before COVID, and by the way, in the resource materials we've provided for the atelier, I've made an article available that I've written about, for all their beauty and the fact that they represent the best of the South African transition since apartheid, the jazz festivals in South Africa effectively exclude this grassroots audience that I'm discussing. So we've taken on, my students and I, the challenge of trying to address post-apartheid inequalities, but now in the context of lockdowns, and we're having to take incredibly seriously the digital divide. And that's what I really want to bring to the conversation today, because we have had extraordinary presentations by people who speak to the incredibly vibrant, exciting youth digital arts cultures in places like Africa. My colleague Tegan has spoken to this. But I'm really grateful that Martin mentioned in his talk 2 days ago that really the divide between the digital and the non-digital, in fact, is probably a figment of our imagination. And we need to see the continuities between the two. And that really social exclusion prior to the digital extends into the digital. And perhaps there's an opportunity for our work towards more meaningful inclusion to also have access to the digital. So I'm going to play a short video, and Anais, this would be my quote, my cue to you, please. This is just to give you a sense of the community of practice I'm working with. There will be subtitles for those sections that are spoken in African languages, and you'll be seeing images very briefly from 2 festival events we've organized under lockdown conditions. One in our theater on campus at Wits University, which we live streamed and had an international audience, but another which we're quite passionate about working towards, which is in community halls, finding ways to also work with the digital to make this accessible. And I'll speak to that after the video. So Anais, let's see if we can get it to work. It's a video with sound and it runs for just under 4 minutes.
More cosmopolitan, e ruta le ntho ya o itse about history, gore jazz e tswa kae, and then o batla go bona e le ko kae. As le nna as a composer, my kind of composition yaanong di a change. Ha ke sa composer in such a way gore ke accommodate batho ba itseng. Setse ke composer for batho kaofela gore you accommodate both youth le the older generation.
We are progressing, and we hope for all these years to come, everything must be okay. I'm really very happy about it because I'm collecting for many, many years. I've got all the kinds of jazz, and I'm happy about what's happening now.
The Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum is an affiliate of the Cosmopolitan Collective, a movement of jazz appreciators, jazz clubs, and other related organizations.
And we want to wish this organization, you know, a great future because it has managed to do what many people or many organizations have not managed to. That is bringing together the education element in jazz. Hence the collaboration with the institution, the VES institution, bringing back also the jazz clubs, or what you call jazz appreciators clubs, bringing back also the jazz diggers. So once we have that concept together, the world is yours.
The reason why I joined Cosmopolitan Collective was the fact that I wanted to learn more about Diga as an art form, and then Diga as a movement, and then again Diga as a social cohesive movement that inspire and encourages people within a certain area in terms of mugodisano, in terms of music collections, in terms of education, in terms of jazz collection and artists and everything else.
We are the diggers. The motive of Cosmopolitan is to unite, to unite all the jazz fanatics around Pretoria, so that we can support each other. We diggers, we need to support the artists, and the artists are supposed to also support us.
So great, thanks so much, Anais. So happy that that worked. So in the 2 minutes remaining, what I want to tell you about is a project we are currently partnering with another festival on, and I've just put their link in the chat. That's a rural festival in South Africa called My Body, My Space, that experimented a few months ago in using the lowest technology that they could to present a festival, which is WhatsApp. And they've had to take out a license. And so we are partnering with them, with this community of practice you've just seen, to see if we can find ways of creating what I would describe as socially grounded, and co-created, but digitally distributed trans-local festival formats. And I look forward to talking more with you about this notion in the other fora we have. Thanks so much, Mike.
Great, Brett. That certainly brought a smile to my face as a South African down in the southern part of the country watching the diggers up in Johannesburg. And thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And so our final panelist is Manon. She's going to be speaking about an entirely different subject, security in the digital space, and yet a very, very important area for us to be concerned about as well. So Manon, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I'm really honored to be here with such a wonderful panel and also audience. I think I'm the only one here who is not a professor. I'm a digital security trainer, and I've worked several years in the human rights field. I also currently work part-time for Free Press Unlimited with journalists. So I'm speaking here in quality of digital security trainer, and I feel a bit like the bad guy listening at all your empowering initiatives. So I'll be speaking about the state of freedom of expression for artists in the last year, and then try to question also the role of festival managers, festival makers, with regard to artists at risk, but also what kind of things you as festival managers you should think about in terms of safety, especially in the online space. So, I mean, at times of shrinking spaces for, I mean, political, civic space, I think the art is really a form of resistance, no? And the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights reminds us actually that cultural rights defenders, who can be media producers, who can be director of cultural institutions, writers, etc., they deserve the same level of attention and protection as other human rights defenders and journalists. And that's what I would like to question today, no? I think anyone attacking the freedom of art is a way to question the democratic freedom of our society, no? And in many ways, our different fields of work, so academia, art, journalism, NGO work, we all, in our way, criticize the status quo, no? We try to be critical, exercise our critical thinking. We try to make sure that our freedoms can be exercised. And that's why many of us in our different sectors are at risk or can be exposed. I mean, if we look at the state of artistic freedom in 2021, artists have been greatly at risk. This is a report that has been drafted by Free News. They reported almost 1,000 acts of violations of artistic expression in 2020 in 89 countries. I'm sure this is underreported because this is only what they can collect. Out of those almost 1,000 acts of violations, I can mention 17 artists who were killed, 82 who were imprisoned, 133 who were detained. And as the director of Free News says, this year's report really illustrates an increasing misuse of blasphemy and anti-terrorism legislation and COVID-19 measures as pretext and excuse to silence dissident voices in the artist world. If we look now closer at the numbers, we see that actually a quarter of these violations occurred online in the digital space, no? And the most affected art forms were films, visual arts, and music. 77 artists actually faced legal consequences because of the use of social media posts or artistic activity online. And the drivers behind these attacks were mostly political. So because these artists were questioning, for instance, their government, their regime, of course, religion was another driver. And for 30% of these attacks, it was COVID. No, a lot of artists have been condemned because they criticized the management, no, the health system management done by government. Somebody is asking me the link for this Free News report. I put it online on the digital map, but I will send it later in the chat. So in a year where most cultural events were moved to online platforms, artists encounter numerous violations to their rights of freedom, as I mentioned. And that makes me wonder, what is the role of social media and online platforms in these attacks and censorship, no? We know that Facebook, for instance, has an oversight board that consists of 40 experts who review the moderation decision, no? And still, we see there's a lot of arbitrarity in the way that content is taken down online. And also there's a lot of arbitrarity in the way that those social platforms respond to governments when government ask Instagram, Facebook, Twitter to take down this content. I'm going to mention now a few online issues that were collected in 2020. And I think this is not only the case in 2020, but you can look back and find many examples of these. So there's a problem of content takedown with regards to nudity. No, many artists use question body positivity or express political views on sexual rights a lot in Latin America, especially. And their content was taken down by algorithm on Instagram or Facebook. And these algorithms are not made in a way that they can decide whether or not it's art. So it's very arbitrary. And when artists try to question and challenge those decisions, it's extremely difficult to get back their art online. And I think that's a very similar topic when I work with journalists, no? Facing censorship and having to deal with those social media platforms is extremely difficult because they are under-resourced, because they don't necessarily under our challenges, and because sometimes they're just ordered by government to take down the content and they face themselves legal consequences. A lot of the content that is taken down it has to do also with political content, no? So there was a case this year of French cartoonists at Charlie Hebdo. I know this is controversial, but still this is freedom of expression. Their cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad were taken down. Because it was it was reported to the platform numerous times as being incorrect or abusive. No, there were also a lot of attack online to artists. With regard to COVID, there is this artist in Chile. What he did is that he created what he calls the Delight Lab. And he was basically showing some kind of messages on the COVID-19 management in Chile. And he came with the word hambre, which means hunger in Spanish. And he received numerous amounts of threats via social media channels and even death threats. And his visual projections were basically taken down of his social media, because he was questioning the system, basically. And India has done the same with political activists lately. They asked Twitter and Facebook to remove posts which were criticizing the management of Modi in the frame of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we see similar challenges when it comes to human rights defenders, artists, and journalists, no? A lot of them also face online intimidation, and I think the response to this is that, for me, there's a lot of impunity going on, no? And there's a huge role of policymakers. There is a responsibility of policymakers in putting some limits or in trying to moderate social media platforms. When it comes to censorship, when it comes to content takedown, when it comes to preserving our freedom of expressions. I think, I mean, it's a very complex topic, no? What's the role of those social platforms? How can policymakers make laws in such a way that those platforms take reasonable decisions in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? how can this be a measured decision when they take down content, when they censor freedom of expression? So as festival makers, I suppose you invite a lot of artists who are themselves at risk, and you become indirectly also at risk, or you take part of the responsibility of their safety when you invite them. And I suppose a lot of you also work in repressive environments when your social media can also be targeted by this kind of attacks and content takedown and censorship. So I wanted to question here, how does digital security matters for festival managers? And I try to think what kind of problematic you could face, no? So I think there's a lot of things you can do to prevent and mitigate risks. And there's a lot of thinking to do for festival managers to be able to prevent those risks from happening, but also have a plan B if something happens, no? I think as festival managers, there's a lot that you can do, not only for your festival, but also for the guests and speakers you invite to ensure their safety, and also for simply to protect the privacy of your attendees, of your audience. For instance, a lot of you mentioned great creative ways of switching your work online, but I'm wondering, have you looked at who owns the data on the platform you have decided to use to go online for your festivals? Have you looked at the permissions that the app you request for registration or payment? Have you looked at the privacy policies of those apps or services? No? And what happens if the data of all your guests, of your thousands of attendees in festivals are leaked online? What kind of individual or personal data do you ask to your audience when they have to register? And what kind of views you will have, you make of this data, no? Do you think that you are respecting European GDPR legislation when it comes to data collection? Will you erase this data when the festival stops? So there are numerous questions you can think about, and I will share a wonderful link on event management by the Tactical Tech Collective. That is very, it's a very fun way to go through your data as festival managers and the things you can think of. I was also thinking, what can you do for artists at risk? No, have you ever thought about safe communications when you invite an artist, for instance, and you ask a travel agency to send a ticket to an artist or a speaker? This email is completely unclear. And what if the artist communication are intercepted? This could probably be a threat to the person. The person could be faced with a travel ban because you have invited him or her to attend your festival. So how do you make sure that you safely communicate with this artist? And how do you make sure that maybe the materials, videos, music that they want to share with you are shared in a safe way? No? Other examples come to my mind. I've seen this year, there's a festival called Noisily. Their social media account, Facebook, were spoofed. So they basically discovered, the Noisily Festival basically did a crowdfunding campaign to try and collect money to kind of survive in these difficult times. And what happened is that they discovered that hundreds of fake accounts were created. At least 15 fake pages of the festivals were created, and many comments, like more than 500 comments, were trying to get the audience from the real page of the festival to those fake pages of the festival. And the final objective was to basically to trick them into entering their bank details and paying on a fake festival page, no? So as festival manager, do you know how to manage your social media to avoid this kind of issues? No? Do you have a strong password in case you're phished? What happens if, for instance, the government wants to attack your festival? The easiest way would probably not be censorship, but simply maybe send you a ransomware so that all audience data is completely locked. All your social accounts are completely blocked. So what do you do if you face this kind of issues? Can you continue your festival? Do you have a plan B? So these are all kind of things that I think are very important to anticipate and think about. So eventually, what we see in digital security is that it's not about tech. It's actually how we educate ourselves to use properly the tech. No, technology is a fantastic word if we know how to use it, and if we are cautious and we are aware of the privacy we put that in place, what kind of data we share, but also how we can safely basically communicate among each other. No, so if you're interested in these kind of topics, I will speak about more practical tools, very simple things this afternoon, trying to give you simple solutions that are practical and realistic to implement. You're not going to change your whole culture of digital security in an hour with me, but I hope I can trigger at least a bit of thinking and give you simple tools. So thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Manon. I think over the last couple of days, we've been speaking very much about going the digital route and, you know, putting things online and the like. And I think you've just provided a very sobering counter, or at least for us to understand the context in which we are working, that nothing is as simple as what we would like to believe or like to think that it is. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that you'll have a whole bunch of signups for your session this afternoon. So maybe just to get the ball rolling in terms of some of the discussions, I'm going to ask maybe each of the panelists a question and then just see where the conversation goes from there. If you do have any questions to ask with the panelists, please feel free to raise them in the chat. I'm wondering, Christine, if I can maybe start with you. So fantastic again that you're doing this kind of research. One of the things that we've been speaking about the last couple of days is that, in a way, we've been spending a lot of time as festival managers and as artists on the supply side. You know, COVID has kind of restricted our platforms for reaching an audience and for generating an income. So we've gone to the digital space to be able to do that. But I'm just wondering, how much research are you doing or have you done around audiences and their expectations of what is being put out on the digital platforms, and how do they consume it? Do they consume it primarily through a mobile device, through a computer, through a television screen that they connect to their mobile device? You know, for us as festival managers and artists to understand what our audiences really want and how they are seeing our work, we've been, you know, spending a lot of time and energy and resources on providing. Do we really understand how we are being perceived and how we are being consumed, and how will that shape what it is that we do? I was also just mentioning yesterday that some of the research done by the Edinburgh Festival, for example, they've been saying that from their research, they've noticed that basically audiences spend 8 minutes on average consuming their work. So to produce a play of an hour or to have a classical music concert of 1.5 hours, are we really understanding the way in which these things are being consumed? So maybe just talk a little bit about that for us.
Absolutely. When we started our research at the beginning of the pandemic, we actually already had a study underway looking at emergency management by festival organizers. And so we just transitioned to that really quickly to instead focus on the pandemic, because that's all that anyone had on their mind at that moment. And so we've spent the past year focusing on the organizations. So I can speak to it from some of the organizations that have reported back to us about their audiences. Interestingly, we are right now at the point of getting our ethics approval to move forward and look at audiences. And part of that decision was, one, we really wanted to focus on the organizers. Nobody knew what was going to happen. We do some work on festival cancellation and what happens when a festival is canceled, because we know that once a festival is canceled once, they often don't ever come back. And that's from before the pandemic. I think we'll see a different trend because of the pandemic. So that was our focus. As we go forward, we plan to look at audiences now that there's been a year of programming to really understand, are people engaging? From the festivals we've talked to, I think a big thing that's happening is that those real really loyal festival attendees, you know, our longtime attendees, our repeat visitors, those are the people who are staying with us in the digital space. It's very challenging. I mostly look at community festivals, not the large for-profit festivals. I focus on not-for-profit community events. And for them to compete online in the digital space in terms of content is really tricky. And so where they are successful is in community building with their existing communities. I don't think that means there isn't an opportunity to build an audience online, and you might find you do generate more interest. But I think, you know, the numbers you cite where people are spending 8 minutes online, it's a real challenge. So that's where we're at. And I'm really hoping by June, I think we've asked for ethics approval to start looking at audiences, both in terms of how they engage with online festivals, if they've even gone into that space, as well as the kind of things that they're spending their time doing when they do go online. But, you know, just anecdotally, I'm very passionate about festivals. I don't go to the online version. Typically what I'm doing is supporting the festivals I engage with through donation. And I just have no interest in my computer. And I just personally think about if that's where I'm at, I can't imagine how challenging it is. And I know in Canada, and I don't know what it's like in different European countries and throughout the world. I know Mexico and the United States, but in Canada, we had excellent funding. Our funders of festivals here supported the festivals and told them basically keep the money, just do something. So a lot of people use their funding to experiment, and they found, I think, most success from the festivals we talked to with hybrid events, particularly at the community level, where they're using the internet as a tool to connect in the real world.
Yeah, I think your anecdotal experience is probably something that all of us can resonate with. And it might be early days yet in terms of your research and so on, but I wondered if there were any trends that you were kind of discerning from. Are there different business models that people are developing at the moment? You mentioned that you work within the nonprofit space. I would imagine most of the festivals represented here are those kinds of festivals as well. And with the challenges of lockdown and the like, what people are very keen to learn how to monetize what it is that they're doing in online platforms and how do they sustain themselves into the future. So I wondered if you had any thoughts in that regard.
Yeah, in terms of the business model, what we're really seeing is, and this is probably everybody's experience here, what's being offered for value is what's shifting, right? We're looking at different ways of offering value. And there's been a lot of different ways organizations have done that. Some really neat things I've seen have been when festivals, for example, there's one Canadian folk festival that has used this as an opportunity to enhance the physical environment, the park in which they take place. And they've actually had a really huge success engaging new community members by participating with local environmental groups in enhancing the outdoor space. And so they've brought their festival volunteers to the outdoor site of their festivals to enhance that physical space. And so in terms of value, it's not monetizing the festival, but it is enhancing their audience so that when they do come back, they've gained a whole new world of audience members to reach out to. In terms of monetizing, I think it is a huge challenge to monetize online. I know in Canada, we're very lucky to have good financial support for the arts. So what a lot of organizations have found is that they have been able to apply for a whole range of new grants they hadn't been able to before because of some of the initiatives that they've taken. And I think that has been a really valuable route for a lot of the organizations, is not looking to audience members who are stressed, overwhelmed, and so on, but looking to either private industry or government for new ways of support to accomplish new things. And so the value they offer is growing in breadth. And I think that that's something that a lot of them look forward to maintaining, whether it's environmental causes that tie in well with their festival or new types of artistic production.
Great. That's fascinating. Very interesting. So thank you very much for that. Hooman, maybe just to pick up something with you, you've offered some incredibly practical ways in which you've gone about doing things, and I think that that's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for.
I hope so.
You know, through these ateliers, and partly why we are busy working on toolkits. It's like how do I do this? Give me 5 steps to do that, and you provided that, which is great. I just wondered if you had anything in that regard, with regard to the follow-up, once people have been identified and they've been integrated, do you have practical ways of following up your newcomers, their integration into society, into festivals? Are they, you spoke about the incredible resilience, and that was a great point to make. But I just wondered if there were tools that we're using in the digital space as means of supporting and following up newcomers once you've identified who they are.
So I think that's something that we all have to do a little bit more is, and that's something that Brett mentioned, I think that's extremely visible with Brett's example of the festival, that it's all WhatsApp now. It's, I mean, there's no digital tool that we can use as compensation for WhatsApp, especially when getting in touch with newcomers. Forget email. Just if you sign up newcomers, put their phones in your put their numbers in your phone and get in touch with them through WhatsApp and stay in touch through that, and creating Facebook communities. Simple social media is really where it's at when you work with newcomers, because that's also the tools that they use to communicate with their families, etc., all around the globe. So you need to get on the platforms that they are on to get your communication done effectively.
And from what you've done so far, what have you kind of discovered? How successful has the work that you've been doing been in sustaining that integration and deepening that integration?
Yeah, so that's we had a festival that I've worked with in 2019. They initially started by inviting about 100 newcomers as part of their audience. And they got to meet also the regular visitors, and we created a kind of atmosphere where they would get to know each other and have a kind of encounter during the festival. And then through that, in 2020, the organization decided they were kind of lucky in between lockdowns, the festival took place. So they had selected from these 100 newcomers, a couple of them did a kind of internship, and they served as tour guides and as ambassadors. And now for 2021, they're thinking about a more long-term perspective to employ these newcomers. So it's internally, the growth from the organization is that the faster you get to know people, the faster they can grow together. And from the other side, for the newcomers, it's always extremely visible directly during or after the event that they are building a social and professional network. And even if that's one or two people you meet during your visit to the festival or the culture organization, or the volunteer work that you do, that's a lot, because you go from 0 basically to 1. So that's 100% increase. And then if you go from 1 to 5 maybe, and that's, for us, it doesn't mean as much maybe, but it's unimaginable how massive that impact is for newcomers. And that's been always extremely visible. We had just one last example. One of the newcomers I spoke to recently was at festivals in 2018 and 19, and he's still in touch with the people he met in 2018. They're still connecting, even though they live in different cities, even though there are different circumstances. One other person who got their status revoked and officially needs to leave the country has found shelter with the people that he volunteered with at a festival. So really a kind of life-saving connection has been created as well. And that's something that I find is again unimaginable for us, because we are very privileged, but for them it's, yeah, extremely impactful and life-changing.
Yeah. Sure. And again, while you might have been developing these things in relation to newcomers, Hooman, the principles are applicable to everyone who's kind of been excluded from festivals, in terms of people trying to integrate, whether it be young people or LGBTI communities or whatever. So yeah, the principles are very applicable. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Brett, moving on to you, you spoke a little bit about low tech as a way of providing access and the like, and I think that's a wonderful concept to be speaking about, because historically festivals have been destination spaces, so people have had to go to a festival to experience it physically. Now with digitization and so on, we are able to make something that happens in a particular space accessible not just more broadly locally, but nationally and even globally. So I was wondering about you know, having access to the kinds of festival that you were showing us in the video, for us in Cape Town, or for people outside of Mamelodi, or for people in other townships and so on? What are the kinds of technologies that you would propose we use to make these kinds of things a lot more accessible, given the inequalities that you've referenced, as well as the inequalities with regard to who has digital access?
Thanks for the question, Mike. And I think it's come up as a theme over the last couple of days that we've started to have to think since last year about our festival content as potentially being delivered in multiple platforms simultaneously. And it's not really a case of either or, but the imperative to try to hold on to the idea of good production values. Although, as you say, interestingly, in many places, festival conditions are not equated with high production values. I think we're sort of in a moment that is similar to where radio was in the mid-20th century, where people learned to actually produce not only radio, but general, the music industry could produce for high-end hi-fi systems at home, but simultaneously for transistor radios. And I think we're having to learn to broadcast our festival content online in a way that, and maybe, this is the equivalent of the transistor radio. Can we give some kind of experience at low resolution, both visually and otherwise, while at the same time we're seeing the kind of innovation that those of us who went to the Night Hotel last night were seeing, where really serious thought is going into producing high production values in the online space, much better, for example, than on Zoom. In a South African context, if we're not talking to a fairly low digital threshold, then in fact, we're practicing social exclusion. And so for me, in my context, that's actually where the real challenge lies. I have to say we were delighted to be able to live stream our concert under very good conditions. As a university, we'd been able to purchase a quite good streaming hardware, and our film and TV students actually did the live streaming. And it's a skill, of course, that we're having to learn now, is to produce good live online content that captures something of the sociality of a festival situation. But actually, it's turning out that the greatest challenge might be to work with the lowest tech with the most intention. Yeah.
I think you make an important point about people having to acquire skills to be able to do the live streaming and the like. And I wondered, as the head of the School of Arts, and this might not be related directly to what we've been talking about, but whether, in fact, what has happened over the last 14 months is beginning to shape your curriculum in new ways. Are there things that you think your various departments that deal with various disciplines are needing to teach the students in order to equip them for this new, probably a hybrid world?
Absolutely, Mike. And of course, we've had to, as educators, been doing hybrid work or purely online work since the start of the lockdown. So it's as much an opportunity to upskill or reskill arts academics as it is to try to understand what the social situation of our students are. There's a really long tradition in Latin America, especially in Brazil, of social pedagogy, of actually centering students' experiences. And the role of the educator is really to themselves teach themselves about what their student situations are and what knowledge is necessary. And I think that's what we're living through now as well. Certainly, those disciplines, like the one that Tegan is based in, that had digital skills, were assumed to be ready. And we found that actually not necessarily so in the context of having to, at the kind of scale we have, to enable learning and teaching in a digital space. And that's because of the social realities we deal with and the inequalities. In our university, for example, we have children of the top 1% in the class with children of the 99%. And what does it mean to try and foster an educational exchange in that space, just as much as it would be a challenge in the public sphere?
Cool, thank you. There's lots to discuss. around that as well. But I want to maybe just move on to Manon now. Manon, so you referenced earlier on in your talk this notion of epidemic expediency, that some writers have referred to, where governments kind of use COVID-19 as a way of doing the kinds of things that they've always wanted to do, which is to restrict, freedom of expression and the like. I just wondered if in your research and experience over the last 14 months, are there particular things that have emerged in the time of the pandemic that governments and other kind of social forces have used as ways of quelling freedom of expression or limiting mobility or these kinds of things that we all hold dear within the arts and culture space?
Thanks for your question, Mike. I don't know if these are new trends, but certainly we can see that everywhere COVID-19 has just accelerated or worsened some of the trends that government were already taking. So what we see is that in many states, COVID-19 led to adopting states of emergency. And that means that certain governments had more permission, let's say, to limit freedom of expression, limit freedom of assembly, and so on. So for instance, in Honduras, for a few days, the government just canceled one article of its constitution that was about if I remember well, access to information and freedom of expression, but it was so much of a scandal to suddenly suppress an article of the Constitution that it was immediately removed. I think to deal with the emergency of the pandemic, many governments have taken have adopted really restrictive laws. The problem is where they measured, with this proportionally adapted to our rights to exercise our freedoms. And I think in many countries, including mine, France, it was not proportionate. And I don't think, and this is, what I see dangerous is how governments sometimes or often actually use social media platforms to try and enforce some decisions. So we've seen recently, as I was mentioning, in India, I find it incredible that a government like the Indian government can force Facebook and Twitter to remove critical content, just critical posts, because they were criticizing the management of Narendra Modi. This shouldn't be normal. Those platforms have a responsibility also to say, no, there is freedom of expression. I am not removing this content. And I think there's a huge debate to have with those social media platforms and also decision makers. Where's the limit? How do we? As I was saying, it's not an easy debate. Like, how do you decide to censor some of the content? What's the role of decision maker and the role of those social platforms? One of the side effects that maybe I see is that then artists or journalists or human rights defenders also tend to exercise self-censorship because they are scared. They are scared to express themselves online. They are scared to post something that is critical of the status quo, and that's something that I think is very dangerous for the artistic expression and for freedom of expression in general. So maybe self-censorship would be a worsening trend, I would say, in 2021.
Yeah, which is a very interesting point as well. I think when Free Muse does its kind of research across the world, in a way it's kind of quite easy to see how artists or journalists are being censored by repressive governments. And yet something that you referenced in your presentation is probably more insidious, particularly within liberal democracies, where the right to freedom of expression is, one of the underlying principles. The fact that people are able to spread fake news, for example, the fact that people are able to tell complete and utter lies in the name of freedom of expression is probably as damaging, if not more of a challenge to the exercise of freedom of expression in some ways. I mean, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, that's another huge debate, no? I mean, there's a lot of research on fake news, especially on social media. And what we see is the way that algorithms are built on Facebook and Twitter is that these platforms because echo chambers, no? Echo chambers for specific groups of interest or thinkers. So you end up being on a social platform and you're taken from one post to another and another and another, but you remain within your kind of bubble of values and this is how fake news also disseminate. Because the way that those algorithms are built kind of encourage the propagation of fake news. So again, what's the responsibility of those social media platforms in kind of letting all this fake news spread? There's a business interest, of course. The more click they have, the more audience they have, the more we feed into their business models, no? So of course, most of those social platforms, they work on it, but they also have a huge interest in just closing their eyes because it's not good for their business. And again, we come back to a decision maker, no? Governments should sit, and they are doing it, and should dialogue with those social media platforms to kind of set a framework to stop the spreading of fake news. Yeah, it is quite shocking to see that artists can be just censored online or journalists, but at the same time, those social media platforms completely close their eyes when you've got anti-COVID movements on Twitter and Facebook who completely deny the existence of this pandemic. So,
but
yeah.
I suppose the question is, what happens when government itself is spreading the fake news?
Oh,
so,
well.
for example, when you have a Donald Trump basically saying the election was stolen,
Yeah.
and there a platform does kind of ban him for sharing the fake news, but you know, he's got other aiders and abettors in television stations and radio stations that come out in support. And this is in the context where freedom of expression is kind of, you know, this is what we stand for, kind of thing. So it's almost as if in liberal democracies, freedom of expression is kind of used in order to spread fake news, and it's incredibly damaging, no?
It is, yeah. Well, this is this is something that we see in many, you say, liberal democracies, but we see this also in authoritarian regimes. The spread of fake news on state-sponsored media channels or media outlets. This is very complicated. I don't think. I mean, those social media platforms. I remember it was quite funny after Donald Trump ended his mandate. His Twitter account, I think, was closed. I don't know if it has even reopened, but he was basically shut up. I mean, it's quite funny. But on the other hand, you could think, okay, it's in terms of freedom of expression, is this really? Are we really abiding by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by doing so? It's a complicated debate. Yeah, the social media platforms also have a responsibility in propagating all these fake news sponsored by governments, and probably, yeah, international mechanisms should play a role in regulating this kind of speech. But I don't have solution. It's a very complex debate.
Oh, but we invited you because you're the person with the solutions to this, Manon. So, no, just kidding. So, but thank you again for raising these issues, because they are such important topics that we need to be engaging with as festival managers, as people engaged in the arts. So it is an area that we've spent not enough time on discussing and debating. So thank you, Manon. That was really great. And thank you to all of the speakers in this panel. It's been a really outstanding panel in terms of raising issues that are of importance to us. So Hooman, Brett, Christine, Manon, thank you. And I'm going to hand back to Inge. There were a couple of questions in the chat from Mohin, for example, and from Maria. I'd like to maybe just invite them to ask those questions in the working groups later, because the speakers will be part of this working group. So make sure that you're part of those and you can raise your questions there with them. Thanks again for your participation, everyone, and back to you, Inge.
Yeah, and I think that's the privilege of those who are really taking part in this training and are not following us on Facebook. So this is an invitation to everybody who is listening to sign up for one of our next ateliers, bit of promotion. But thank you for following us. We are still continuing this afternoon and tomorrow with exploring all these topics more in depth. So there is no other live stream to announce. So see you at the next atelier.